Hi, everybody. Welcome to Mormonish. I'm Rebecca.
And I'm Landon.
And we have a wonderful returning guest. We have Unoriginal Jim, which is probably the most original name we've had in a guest. How are you? How are you this evening?
Fantastic, guys. I'm excited to be back. This is gonna be fun.
Yeah, and I don't know. Okay, I'm gonna link our previous episode with Jim in the show notes because if you missed it, it was something. Jim is an aviation expert, and we debunked the spiral of flaming death airplane story that President Nelson and the Church News keeps putting out there over and over again. So it was a fantastic episode, wasn't it, Landon?
It was. I had a great time. It's one of my favorite ones because I love aviation. So
right.
I could talk about it all day long.
It was fun to do. But
exactly. But you know,
we found Unoriginal Jim as a man of many talents. And so
yeah, usually smart people are smart in every way. You know what I mean? So I had noticed some content that he was putting up online, going through some things. I'm like, this is amazing. This is brilliant. I wonder if he'd ever want to do more of a long form. And he said yes. And he actually just told us that he's putting out TikToks under that name, right? Unoriginal Jim. Seriously. Yep. This stuff is good. You guys need to check out that TikTok. And after we go through what we're going to go through today, you will see what I mean. So this is going to be absolutely fantastic. And we thank Jim for bringing this on to Mormonish because this is pretty unique, I think. I haven't really seen this dealt with in this way before. So it's going to be fantastic.
So my background is transportation. Okay. And in working in transportation, there's this running joke, right? There's two things on a project you don't want to have happen. You don't want to have to do an environmental assessment, which brings in the EPA and everything, and you don't want to find human remains. Okay. And so if you're on a construction project or something like that, and you're receiving government funds, if you find human remains, you have to stop the project, shut everything down. The coroner has to be contacted. If it's indigenous, then the state archaeologist has to be called out. So nobody on any construction project wants to have that happen. And so I started to think a while back is, okay, well, what kind of construction projects have happened in the Ontario County, Wayne County, New York region? Mm-hmm. And I kind of tucked that away in the back of my head. And then I was on Facebook, and Rod Meldrum's Firm Foundation posted a picture of a mass grave. And they're like, hey, this picture is proof of bone pits in Wayne County, New York, next to Palmyra. And I'm like, okay, let's rabbit hole the hell out of that, right? And so I started looking up, and I started to find out. And I'll talk about this in the presentation. But they had taken a picture of an actual Native American tragedy and rebranded it as proof of the Book of Mormon. In Wayne County. And I was like, hold on a second. If these things were here, there's been enough agricultural development that there would be information about it. So I started to think, okay, this is Hill Cumorah literalism. These are people in either church leaders or apologists who believe that what's written in the Book of Mormon is absolutely literal, that it did happen. We had 2,220,000 people who died in that one region. So where does that history come from? That narrative. We inherited it from somebody. Okay. How did it come down to the church? How did it come down to these apologists who take it literally? And then what kind of development or what's happened in New York in the last 200 years? Where should we have found evidence? Okay. So that's what we're going to walk through. The first step is going to be, where did the ideas of a literal Cumorah battle killing millions of people come from? We're going to chase that for a little bit. And then we're going to go, okay, what church leaders have said this, and why was it presented to us as literal for our entire lives? I mean, I've got quotes from the 1975 General Conference, which was 5 years before I was born. Okay. And then the literal apologists, why does fact not matter to them? Okay. And then we're going to say, okay, let's look at Wayne County. Let's look at construction projects. Let's look at the Erie Canal. Let's look at all this stuff. And then basically say, okay, what kind of evidence should be there to match these claims? So sometimes I worry that I might go a little bit Hugh Nibley on people and have this huge circuitous process where I come back to a final point. I swear to God, I'm not trying to do that. But sometimes the nature of putting together a narrative happens that way. So
And our viewers are smart. Our viewers are very smart, as you know. So they love that. You kind of take us along. And then at the end, it's like, aha moment, because you've been with it the whole time. And then, you arrive at it.
The post-Mormon community is so good at analysis.
They're so smart. Yeah.
It never, like, you read the ex-Mormon Reddit, and there's not a day that goes by there. And people are like, oh, it's so mean. It can be mean, right? But at the same time, you'll find people and you're just like, holy hell, I never thought of that before. So I hope that this kind of works out like that. It's going to be interesting. I found stuff that I had never seen before. So hopefully we have some fun with it.
So I think the state should pick all jurors out of the post-Mormon world, because they've learned to question everything and analyze the heck out.
Prove it, they say. Prove it. I won't believe it till you prove it. So.
What's your source on that?
Yeah.
Where did that source come from? What was the context that the source was written in?
No joke. I learned that the hard way when I first ventured onto ex-Mormon Reddit years ago, and I'd post something that I knew. I just knew it. I'd always known it. And then someone's like, well, where'd you get that? I'm like, where did I get that? So you definitely have to train yourself. But I love thinking that way because, you can really deconstruct what you thought you knew, where you knew it, and, who you got it from. And then it's, it's more accurate.
Well, the deconstruction process, I describe it as, what do I believe and why do I believe it?
Yeah,
and the questions you ask, that they make you rabbit hole stuff, right? Yeah. And we just carried on with everything else. Let me go ahead and how do I?
Let's bring the slides up for sure. Yeah. And again, all of this is talking about what would be known as the Heartland model. Yes. Which is it's newer. When we were all kids, it was Mesoamerica, right? We never really heard it was.
I've never, because I always heard it was all right around.
Can you guys see that?
No,
not yet.
No, that it was all around the Hill Cumorah area, and that it was all right there. Now they've kind of expanded it. I don't know. It goes over to Wisconsin and Mississippi and all that other places, and
it's wherever you want it to be.
Down to Louisiana and all of that. So they've certainly expanded it. Then it became the Mesoamerica model, and because the Heartland simply doesn't have anything in it that matches anything they describe, and so they went to Mesoamerica. But again, they just because it was the only place that possibly could have been in the Americas, and but now the Heartland seems to be making a comeback among some of Rod Meldrum's group and others. So
well, Joseph Smith himself said, here's where it is. In fact, here's Zelf's bones, right? But I think the thing that's so objectionable is just taking a narrative, like you mentioned, Jim, and placing it on a place and then placing it on a people, some other kind of narrative. So do you want to go into presentation mode? I'm seeing the editing screen. So slideshow.
Just from beginning there. Yep.
Yeah. Oh, there you go.
All right, so poking holes.
Yeah, these are spectacular slides, everybody. I had a chance to preview them, and I'm just like, wow, your AI outdoes mine 1,000%. I mean, a Swiss cheese or a cheddar cheese, Moreau Angel, who can do that?
I'm not gonna lie. Then I did that. I might have been drinking just a little bit, and I remember just thinking
all
that
the
was the
better,
funniest thing I'd ever seen. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about here, you're right. We've been talking about Meldrum's Heartland group. So the Heartland group, they are very aggressive. They are all over Facebook. They have multiple pages. They post this stuff. They show up. They'll comment on the LDS official threads. Joseph knew this, all this other stuff. They're very aggressive in their message. Mm-hmm. And they're able to effectively use quotes from church leaders. And basically they present themselves as the faithful response to corruption of history by a secret combination led by the vicious and mean-spirited Leonard Arrington. So the thing is so when we get into talking about the Firm Foundation, I'm going to show you some of the ridiculous stuff that they do, and we're going to laugh about it, but we're also have to keep in mind that people believe this, and the lies that they put out there are believed, and they're perpetuated in the name of faith. And so that's why we need to understand this history so that we can back up on that. So the first stop on our 74 slide journey is,
get your popcorn, everybody.
So beware of false knowledge. It is more dangerous than ignorance. All right. George Bernard Shaw. That's when you believe something and it's not true, but you are thoroughly invested in it. That's different than being ignorant. Ignorant means you don't know it, right? But having false knowledge is like fake news, right? You can just throw it out there. Nothing's going to change the way you think. So Mormonism comes forth in an environment where the origin of indigenous populations is very, very questioned. And on my TikTok, I have a video where I talk about all the different books which were published from the 16th century to the 1830s. So 264 years of speculation. Where did Native American populations come from? Were they Jews? Were they Hindus? Who knows where they were? Okay. So Mormonism comes out in this environment, and there's two major narratives. There's where did the Native Americans come from? Were they Jews? Lost 12 tribes? And who were the Moundbuilders? And Joseph Smith takes both of those narratives and merges them into one. It's like, hey, the Native Americans are descended from the Jews, but it also takes care of the Moundbuilder story as well. He ties all those together.
So he was answering the questions of the day, and he was correct. Giving people the answer that they wanted, that made it all fit tightly, perfectly with a bow. I don't think a lot of people realize that this is not a novel idea, that they were Jewish. This was an idea of the day, and people don't know that.
Yes, absolutely. And so the Book of Mormon, so you have all these other books that come out, all these other speculative theories. The Book of Mormon doesn't try to offer scientific evidence. It doesn't try to offer reason. It doesn't try to offer observation of native populations like other books did. Joseph Smith just says, hey, here's the evidence. Boom. He presents the Book of Mormon as the evidence for contemporary ideas on where these populations came from. And so the Cumorah narrative draws on those theories and presents them as historical fact. Like we'll show here in a second, the idea that there was a culturally advanced white race that was destroyed by darker skinned savages was so common, it made its way into Andrew Jackson's State of the Union address in 1830. Okay, so this wasn't something that people were just speculating on. This was part of the cultural narrative. So the Cumorah narrative then is central to his time and place, but it's also central to the entire message of the Book of Mormon. The identity of the Book of Mormon is tied up in, did Cumorah happen or not? If it didn't happen, then everything else before that is fiction. If it did happen, and if you can show that it happened, then you have the truth that God really did destroy these populations, and we need to give that weight. Unfortunately, as the church knows, it's a falsifiable claim, right? And so we're going to talk about that. And so this has led Mormons to dismiss authoritative research and anthropological evidence, and instead they will submit a religiously imposed narrative on historical fact, and that is the false knowledge. So, okay.
Which really is no different than the Bible. I mean, when you look at the Bible, it's just a narrative of where did all these different people come from? They're looking around, they're going, why are there all these people who speak different languages and different oh, well, this guy came from, Ham, and he had these people and they became the Moabites and these people. And that's basically what Joseph is doing. He's going, oh yeah, where'd these Native Americans come from? Oh, well, they came from these people and this is how they got here. And he imposes a narrative to explain how they got there. And it's about as true as the Bible narrative on how all these Moabites, how everyone had a kid and they became a different city, right. In essence. So
yeah. All right. So we're going to kind of examine this evidence. So the first thing we're going to talk about, where do these claims come from? Well, they come from 19th century ideas, the church and its leaders. We're going to talk about that because literalism is not tied to fact, anything can become proof. We're going to talk about the fact that apologists will use Native American mass graves as proof of the Book of Mormon outside of context, therefore whitewashing those dead people of their culture and their background and their story. We're going to take a look at the scope of the death tolls in the literalist worldview. Okay, how many people are we actually looking for in the ground? And then we're going to talk about how common is it to find Native American artifacts or remains. And what we're going to do is we're going to pull examples of that from modern transportation development and urban development and agricultural development. Okay. And then we're going to just say, would this example, these construction examples, these agricultural examples, would they apply to the Book of Mormon narrative? Okay. So 6 things, and I'm going to try to go through it as fast as I can. And again, I apologize if I go Hugh Nibley and go really circuitous. So
we love it. Going Hugh Nibley. I love it.
which is the difference is that unlike Nibley, I'm going to show you my sources. So
there you go. That's it.
So the first, okay. So you had a episode just about a week ago of somebody who talked a great deal about the Erie Canal, which was fascinating.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about the Erie Canal as well. We're also going to talk about DeWitt Clinton, who was the creator of the Erie Canal. Okay. So starting in 1811, he is giving a series of lectures to the Historical Society in New York, where he is also the president. Okay. Now, these are filled with 19th-century scientific racism. So he talks about the mounds in the Finger Lake region. And in this text written in 1811, he specifically denotes Canandaigua. So he's talking about Ontario County, which is like 15 miles from Joseph's house. Okay. So you have a man at this point in time who's giving a lecture to the New York Historical Society about mounds in Ontario, just south of where Joseph lives. And he says, one of the first things he says is it is equally clear that these are not the work of Indians. So he's saying there's no way Indian populations built these. He says that the area was inhabited by a race of men much more populous and much more further advanced in civilization. So these were people who were skilled. They aren't the savages. I'm going to make sure everybody sees my air quote, so I'm not saying it. He says these fortifications have been generally considered as surpassing the skill, patience, and industry of the Indian race. So again, we're degrading the indigenous populations, which if you look at how they are presented in the Book of Mormon, they are always degraded. They're always one step down. They're less than. And then he says, a great part of North America was inhabited by populous nations who made considerable advances in civilization. Okay. Mind you, this is 1811. And then what happened to those populations? Well, in this text, he goes through and he points out that, this mighty stream of people, that they remained free for generations and that they availed themselves of tranquility, and they devoted themselves to making rapid progress in civilizations. They became a large population. And then he says, in the course of time, discord and war would rage among them and compel them to establish places of security. Okay. So population, peaceful, growing, they have all the advancement, and then the wars start, right? And he says the great law of preservation compelled them to stand on their defense, to resist those ruthless invaders, to construct numerous and extensive works of protection, and the fortifications of which we have treated are the only remaining monuments of these ancient and exterminated nations. Okay.
And so he's making this up. Like he's completely making it up.
Yeah.
That's what I love. Presenting it as fact. It's just in the soup of the day for Joseph Smith to go, yeah, this is what happened.
Yeah. So anybody who wants to know more about this, you need to read the Moundbuilder myth. Excellent book. You need to read Old Canaan in the New World. Excellent book. And then the last one is Lost Tribes Found. 3 books. And if you really, and of course, my hero, Dan Vogel. If you really want to know more about this, those are the four books to read. But yeah, so he is making this up. And the entire nation was making this up because they had to have a way to contextualize the populations that they were dealing with. And to admit that Native Americans were capable of great feats meant that they would have had to have treated them on equal terms. And so 3 things you want to do when you want to destroy somebody: you dehumanize them, you demean them, and you dismiss them. Okay? And by doing that, you can make it so you can carry out any horrible act against somebody and still feel justified, which I'll show here in a second. So that's 1811 to the New York Historical Society, coming from DeWitt Clinton, who at that point in time was the mayor of New York. In 1817, Clinton is now the governor. And he, again, brings up Canandaigua specifically in this document here. So Memoir of the Antiquities of the Western Parts of New York. And in the first part of this quote, he talks about going out to these mounds, and he talks about them finding these slabs that were written in unknown characters, plainly figured on the stone to the extent of 18 inches. But when he went back, they were gone. Okay. So he's talking about the fact that out of these mounds, they're pulling documents, they're pulling ancient writing, they're pulling, these mystic slabs. And then at the end of the document, after talking about the fortifications and stuff like this, he says, enough has been said to demonstrate that the existence of a vast population settled in towns, defended by forts, cultivating agriculture, and more advanced in civilization than the nations which have inhabited the same countries since European discovery. Okay. Now, in the Mound Builder myth, he also talks about the fact that before 1800, okay, speculation on mound builders and Native Americans was limited to the upper classes. But by the time you get to the later 1800s, that begins to move out to the population. And this book was one of the first to be published for the wider consumption. It was published in New York. So I'm going to tie that back to your previous episode with the library barges on the canal. You have the governor of New York who's giving a presentation talking about Native populations in the area of Palmyra. I believe it's reasonable to conclude that at some point in time, this document would have shown up there because it was published in 1820 for the general population. Okay, so these ideas then are perpetuated in Palmyra's newspapers. Okay, so the Palmyra Register on January 21st, 1818 states that the mound builders were killed in battle and hastily buried. Okay, that's from Vogel. In 1823, the Palmyra Herald opined that the fortifications were not forts, but they were religious temples and places of public worship. Okay, and then the mound builder. So according to the mound builder myth, it says Palmyra was in mound builder country, the uppermost point of the great arc of mounds and pyramids that stretched from Ohio to Mexico. He states that the Palmyra Register, the Herald, they would take articles from bigger newspapers and republish them based upon what people wanted to read. Okay, but every time they republished one of these articles, they had to pay the bigger newspaper. So for the Palmyra Register and the Herald to pick up articles on the mound builders and pay for that content, people in Palmyra were consuming that content, or else they wouldn't have been spending the money to reprint the articles. Okay, it goes to show you that there was interest in this subject in Palmyra during this period of time because it shows up in the newspapers. More importantly, we know from Vogel's book that Joseph would go into Palmyra to buy the newspapers. Like Vogel talks about that specifically. Vogel and natural born seer Van Wagenen. Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's in both of the sources. So we know that they were reading. We know that they were not backcountry bumpkins. Okay,
and you're talking
Palmyra. Oh, sorry. Palmyra's got what, a couple hundred people is the population. So if they're talking about it, we're not talking about New York City with 12 million people. We're talking about a couple hundred, maybe 1,000 people in a town. That means everybody's talking. Everyone knows what's going on because it doesn't take long to spread to that many people.
Well, and think about the excitement. Okay, you're living in the frontier. And the governor of your state is saying that your region is the answer to the mystery of where these people came from, right? And more importantly, the idea that these populations were there was further compounded by religious ministers who, as early as the 1600s, were talking about the fact that white people were brought here to this country by God for the purpose of helping these people know who they really were. Okay, so all these narratives tied together. So,
and to me, I was going to say, this is right in Joseph's wheelhouse, right? It's romanticized, it's exciting, it's history, mystery, treasure, archaeology, and to me, that just makes me even more convinced that the Book of Mormon was supposed to be some kind of adventure novel of what everybody wanted to read, right? Mm-hmm. If they're reading it in the paper, maybe they'll read my book, and I'll sell my book, which we know he was trying to do. And only later then, realized, there's also money to be made turning it into more of a religious text. But I think he was giving the people what they wanted, and everybody wanted this because they were all talking about it.
Yes, exactly. I mean, you get the same thing with Spalding's text. We don't have what Spalding actually wrote, but we do know it was an adventure based upon mound builders, right?
Yep.
And so between 1810 and 1820, reports of the mound builders were everywhere, and it attributes them to everything from Native Americans to the Scythians in Europe, And it talks about this. This is talking about the newspapers. So Cincinnati, Boston, Albany, they were all running articles on the Moundbuilders. And it just says here, Palmyra, the hometown of Joseph Smith, was republishing those same articles. So, but once again, the Moundbuilder myth, fantastic book. So these news articles then begin to fuel treasure hunting. All right. And this is, Landon, do you want to read this quote?
Sure. Outside of the educated elite, stories of the mounds tended to revolve around the supernatural. Many mounds attracted legends of buried treasure, and stories were frequently told of ghosts or other supernatural guardians who prevented the treasure from being found. Many settlers rooted around in mounds looking for legendary treasures, but none was ever found. This did not stop stories from being passed around that someone somewhere had found gold and jewels in certain mounds. What they really found, however, was rarely more than some arrowheads and disarticulated bones.
Yeah. So this, again, it fits with the environment. And even there was evidence shown that even into the late 1700s, Native American populations were still building mounds. So by the time Joseph Smith comes along, you would have reports of people digging in mounds and finding swords, because Native Americans, when they took something in battle or something like that, a lot of them were often buried with that. So you would have, if they had a piece of armor that they stole from somebody in the British in the 1600s, they might have been buried with it. If the French brought over some coins, some silver coins, they would have been buried with that, right? So it is possible that while people were digging through this stuff, the stories that came up were true. They did find the sword in a mound. It was an iron sword, and so we have to understand, people had been digging in these things and creating these stories for a very long time.
And these artifacts would not have been thousands of years old. These artifacts would have been 100 or so years old, which explains our visit to the Church History Museum. Landon, you remember that, where the nice senior missionary guide said, oh, there are Lamanite and Nephite artifacts in museums all throughout New York. They're all there. You can go and see them. And Landon just kind of dead looks her in the eye and goes, no, they're not. I said, okay, let's move along. Yeah, but she was convinced that, in every museum you'd go to in the New York area, you're going to find, and I don't know if they'd be labeled Lamanite, Nephite artifacts, but she was convinced they were there. And she was telling everyone that came to the museum that they were there.
Because that's the narrative, right?
Yep.
That's the narrative. That's the narrative I was raised on.
Yeah.
Okay, so these newspapers, the proliferation of the concepts, the political figures, all that's going to fuel your treasure hunting. Now, like I said before, these ideas were so common that by December 1830, Andrew Jackson uses the mound builder myth, the idea that this primitive white race, this cultivated advanced race, was wiped out and killed by their darker savage cousins. Okay, so this is from the 1830, December 6, 1830. It's kind of his State of the Union. And it says, Jackson justified the legitimacy and moral rightness of the new law by appealing to the widespread belief in the mound builder myth, arguing that Native American savage attacks on the lost white race that built the mounds had condemned them to exile and eventual extinction. And this is Jackson. He says, in the monuments and fortresses of an unknown people spread over extensive regions of the West, we behold the memorials of a once powerful race which was exterminated or has disappeared to make room for the existing savages. So if this is showing up in December of 1830, 6 months or 8 months after the Book of Mormon is published, the idea was there long to begin with. And it wasn't some provincial backwoods idea. This had permeated through the intellectuals, into the politicians, into DC, to make it as a public address from the President of the United States.
And again, It was a fact. It was absolutely a fact that he was stating, this is what happened, and this is why we can react the way we do today. So
that's right. So it's perfectly okay for us to kill the Indians because they killed somebody else, right?
Yeah.
And again, I'm not saying the word Indians. I'm saying that that's what he would have said.
Yes.
So these ideas then fuel Joseph's imagination. So everybody knows this quote. This is a great one. But I think if you take it to the context, the speeches about New York, the references to Ontario and Canandaigua in these books, the newspaper articles, the treasure digging lore, for Joseph to show up and his mom to say, hey, he would give us these wild presentations, and he would sit by the fire and he would talk about that. For those of people who can't read the screen, it says that Joseph would come in and he would give the most amusing recitals that could be imagined. He would describe the ancient inhabitants of this continent, their dress, their mode of traveling, the animals upon which they rode, their cities, their buildings, and every particular of their mode of warfare, and also their religious worship. This he would do with as much ease, seemingly, as if he had spent his whole life with them. So fascinating then to say, okay, this is what he's talking about, right? And then we understand that what he's talking about is represented in all these other sources.
Yeah, it also makes me realize that, in the past when I read that quote, I think, oh, he was just using his imagination and he was just kind of fabricating things. I'm guessing that he's regurgitating things that he heard in conversation or read. And I'm guessing everybody was sort of talking about what they might have been like, who they were. And, he's just adding to that existing narrative that's out there.
Yes. Yeah. And he's riffing on it. He's doing what
riffing on it. Yeah. That's it.
So these ideas then also fuel the treasure lore environment, right? So this is from Vogel, and he says, actually, Landon, Rebecca, I'm not going to ask you to read.
No, I can read. I can see this.
Oh, you can?
I knew you were not asking me because you thought I couldn't, but I have a bigger monitor. I have to kind of look to the side, but I can see it. But thank you for being considerate. I'll read it. It says, Joseph Sr. told Saunders that Joseph Jr. could see in his peepstone what there was in that cave, and that young Joe could see a man sitting in a gold chair. Old Joe said he was king, i.e. the man in the chair, a king of one of the Native American tribes who was shut in there at the time of one of their big battles. Even at this early date, sometime between 1822 and 1825, one discerns a hint of interest in American Indian lore on Joseph's part. Interesting.
Yeah. So it was there because he was reading it in the newspapers. He was hearing it from ministers. He was hearing it from politicians. It was, if you think about the King Arthur lore in England, right? Every kid knew that because it was written in stories and serials. The Moundbuilder myth, it shows up in poetry. It shows up in William Collins Bryant's poetry in 1833. So it showed up in common poetry. It was in politics. It was his environment. He was living and breathing it. He was fascinated by it. It fueled his treasure hunting and ultimately his imagination. So Joseph then, he claims that all of these ideas he had came through revelation. All right. They came through imagination. Absolutely. And so this quote from 1842 from the Wentworth letter, he talks about how he was informed via revelation of the Aboriginal inhabitants of the country. He was shown who they were, from where they came, a brief sketch of their origin, their progress, their civilization, their laws, their government, their righteousness. And so he basically says, through God, I saw all of this stuff. This was all revealed to me. Okay. But we know that in 1823, 24, he's talking about this. He's giving recitals to his family. So this all came from the environment in which he came up. So that then moves. So we're talking about, where did these ideas come from? Well, they came from the environment in New York in the 1800s. And now we're going to go to how they progress into the Book of Mormon and then to the church leaders. So the church website says specifically that the Book of Mormon is a sacred record of peoples in ancient America and was engraved upon plates. That is not a theoretical statement. That is a factual statement. This is a record of people in ancient America, and it was engraved upon metal plates. The literalists at the Firm Foundation, if they're going to be asked, hey, the Book of Mormon it's inspired fiction. No, it's not. Look at the church website. It's a historical record. The title page claims it's a historical record translated by Smith. Smith claims it's the most correct book. Okay. And then the church leaders take this and they're going to move straight through it, because key to this record being a historical record is the record of the people and their ultimate demise. Right. So, all right.
It's just century. Almost embarrassing that, like, everyone else knows, oh, no, this was just, mythology of the time and it was there. Then you have this tiny little sect that goes, oh no, it's real. We're going to base everything on it. It's almost like, how awkward.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. So we're going to talk about, okay, so in the 19th century, we're going to take a look at 4 or 5 examples of how this literal narrative moves down to us today. Okay. So we'll start with Orson Pratt. Now, the Millennial Star, I believe that one was published in England, right? So he says the Hill Cumorah and the surrounding vicinity is distinguished as the great battlefield upon which and near which two powerful nations were concentrated with all of their forces. Men, women, children fought till hundreds of thousands on both sides were hewn down, left to molder on the ground. And these new plates were given to Moroni to finish the history. And all the ancient plates Moroni deposited in Cumorah. So, hey, he hid them, this huge library in the hill that we hear about, right? And then he basically says that the place where these people died, where these battles took place, is the place where Joseph got the plates in 1827. So that was Orson Pratt, 1866. Okay, this is not a speculative comment. This is fact.
Right.
Yeah, this is literalism, because obviously he buried plates, he wrote on plates, they translated from plates. That must be literal. You can't make an argument that this is just stories that you can learn from.
Yeah, it's not inspired fiction.
Many do. They say it's all allegorical, but clearly, no.
Yeah. And then this is Oliver Cowdery. So this is 1835. So this is the LDS messenger and advocate. So this is one of his letters. It says, here between these hills, the entire power and national strength of both the Jaredite and Nephites was destroyed. Now, mind you, the literalists, the firm foundation, they use these exact same quotes. These are the quotes that they have in their circular logic. This is the place because the brethren say it's the place. Therefore, this is the place. And he says, in this valley fell the remaining strength and pride of a once powerful people, the Nephites, so highly favored of the Lord, but in that time of darkness, doomed to suffer extermination by the hand of their barbarous and uncivilized brethren. Remind you of anything that we just said a second ago?
Yeah.
From the top of the hill, Mormon with a few others, they gazed on in horror, all that stuff. So Oliver Cowdery, again, absolutely. This goes down to the early 20th century then. So we move on to 1828. In the improvement era, President Anthony Ivins of the First Presidency writes an entire article about how this is the literal place. And he says, according to the Book of Mormon, many hundreds of thousands of people fell in battle around this hill and in this immediate vicinity. It was here that two once powerful nations were exterminated so far as their national existence was concerned. It was here these nations gathered together for the last of their great struggles. Okay. So that's the improvement era, 1928 in June. Okay. So I'm not going to read this whole quote. So if folks want to read the whole quotes, they can pause it. I may have gotten a little bit heavy with the cut and paste.
You never can, because people can pause and read. And if I was going to say, it says this is a sacred spot. That's what that last paragraph. This place, this is it. Not allegorical, not figurative, not alluding to something. It is a sacred spot. So,
all right, 1966, Mormon Doctrine, a book that before I went on my mission, I devoured this book. I love this book. I hate it now. Loved it then. So, page 174. Both Nephite and Jaredite civilizations fought their final battle, their final great wars of extinction at and near the Hill Cumorah, or Ramah, as the Jaredites called it, which is located between Palmyra and Manchester in the western part of New York. It was here that Moroni hid up the gold plates from which the Book of Mormon was translated. Okay, so that book, when it was published, sold like wildfire. It was the book on Mormonism, even up until I got it in the late 90s. And even still today, the older generation, they will still quote from this all the time. So we won't read this whole quote, but this is brought up again in October 1975 General Conference. He says, in the western part of New York, Palmyra is a prominent hill known as the Hill Cumorah. On January 25th of this year, I stood at the crest of that hill, admiring with awe and breathtaking panorama, which stretched out before me on every hand. My mind reverted to the events which occurred in that vicinity some 25 centuries ago, which brought an end to the great Jaredite nation. All right, so this is conference. He's talking about this. It says that, and then he carries on. The second civilization to which I refer, the Nephites, let's see, I got to move my thing here, flourished in America between 600 and 400 AD. And their civilization came to an end for the same reason at the same place in the same manner as the Jaredites. And then in the text, the actual text of the talk, he gives the number. So in the beginning, he talks about 2 million. Here he talks about 230,000 people. So according to the church leaders, we're talking about a area, a 2-county area, basically, where 2,200,000 people were killed. So the Watson letter. And I know there's controversy about this because there's claims that there was a second Watson letter and stuff like this. But in 1990, Michael F. Watson, who is the secretary to the first presidency, was responding to a question from a member of a ward, Brother Sparks, who was in the Moore ward in Oklahoma City. So Michael Watson responds on behalf of the first presidency. And in this statement, he says, the church has long maintained and attested to by references in the writings of the general authorities that the Hill Cumorah in Western New York is the same as referenced in the Book of Mormon. Okay, so that was sent to a bishop to answer the question of somebody that was brought up, of a question that was brought up in someone's ward.
In 1990.
Which is interesting because now they say they take no position on where the lands of the Book of Mormon are.
Yep, they will not weigh in. Yep, they say that over and over.
I'm going too far. All right, so let's see here. Yes. Have you guys seen the great Book of Mormon videos?
Yeah, I've seen some of them.
Yeah, okay. They're I'm not going to say that. They're great. I love them. They're my favorite. So this is how the church depicts it. So I wanted to show the clip from the Book of Mormon video, but I realized that we'd be hit with a copyright strike. And so what I did is I took stills from it. So there is a Book of Mormon video that is Moroni sees his people die, and they have it set up like the movie Gladiator. You know, Moroni is standing out in front of his people, and he yells charge. The two armies come clashing together. This is a still from that battle sequence, okay? And over here, you have the Nephites. You can see there's thousands of them, throngs of people. And over here, you have the Lamanites, millions of people out here. Okay, so this is supposed to be Western New York, right?
But and what year is this particular video? I know they've been putting them out. That's what I was going to say. This is very current.
Yes, yeah. This is last year. So this is how it's depicted. This is the before the battle, right? When they're all charging at each other. And then this is after the battle. Okay, so you can see the bodies are strewn all throughout the entire area. There's smoke coming up. You know, hundreds of thousands of people are dead. You know, and the scripture states specifically that all these bodies were left to rot on the ground. Okay, so this is in the most recent depiction of this. This is very literal. Now the twist, like you just said, Landon. So could you read that quote for me?
Sure. Although church members continue to discuss such theories today, the church's only position is that the events of the Book of Mormon describes took place in the ancient Americas. The church does not take a position on the specific geographic locations of Book of Mormon events in the ancient Americas. Speculation on the geography of the Book of Mormon may mislead instead of enlighten. Such a study can be a distraction from its divine purpose. Individuals may have their own opinions.
I'm sorry. I just go ahead.
Individuals may have their own opinions regarding Book of Mormon geography and other such matters about which the Lord has not spoken. However, the first presidency and quorum of the 12 apostles urge leaders and members not to advocate those personal theories in any setting or manner that would imply either prophetic or church support for those theories. All parties should strive to avoid contention on these matters. And this is even though we just read a first presidency member saying that this is where it happened at.
Well, it's worse than that, right? It's like the Lord has not spoken. It's in the damn text. Yeah. It says specifically, the hill Ramah is the same place where I put these hills. Yeah. And then you have church leader after church. And that's why we went through that protracted process, right? To show, starting with Joseph Smith, this is the place, this is the place, this is the place, this is the place. So the firm foundation, Book of Mormon evidences, the Joseph Smith Foundation, the Stoddards, in their literal conspiracy theory driven orientations, it comes from what the church has said. And the church's position is, hey, we don't take a position except for when we did take a position, but don't quote us on that.
Because the position we took is falsifiable and has been proven to not be true. Therefore, we have to move the goalposts and say, we don't know where it's at.
And you can have either position here. Just don't talk to your neighbor about it or have contention or bother anyone. But as long as you're attending, your bum's in the seat, you're paying your tithing, you can believe whatever you want about where the Book of Mormon happened, because the Lord doesn't need to weigh in. It is not really important, although it is the most important thing.
That's right.
And we sell books in Deseret Book that talk about both of these, that you can find whatever one you want. Yeah.
No, I feel very strongly about this because my parents, I've described them before, they were both scientists. However, they became addicted to farms when I was growing up. Not farming, but the ancient research. And we would take road trips to BYU from Washington State. We would get the books. Once I really realized what they were studying, I was just floored because it was junk science, but they ate it up. They loved it. They loved it. They read the books every night. My mom, when she passed away, she still has all those books right beside her bedside, tabbed up, notes everywhere, and we were like, what do we do with these now? That we donated it to someone who was also addicted to farms. But this was real. People ate this up and it kept them in the church, and it was mystical and magical and amazing and real. So absolutely real.
That's precisely the point. Okay. Is one of the points. People in Joseph Smith's day were obsessed with the mound builder narrative because it was magical. It was mystical. Mormonism has perpetuated that. Just like we perpetuate some of the occult elements that Joseph Smith has, Mormons love the mystical, and I'll talk about that later. But I grew up in West Central Missouri. Okay, I went to college in Warrensburg, Missouri, and you could jump in your car, drive right up Route 13, it would take you directly to Adam-on-Diamond. So my entire youth, I had the idea of just up the street from me is where Adam was. And I would walk around this very boring location. It's pretty, but it's boring. And my mind was just always caught up on what happened here, what will happen here, right? And you leave and you induce this spiritual high. And that's what this stuff does. People get involved with it, and that's the end result. However, this literalism, in order for this literalism to carry through, there has to be an explanation for why things don't happen. And so Mormonism then ends up breeding these conspiracy theories about the Book of Mormon and about lost white races and about the fact that, I saw one about a conspiracy at the Smithsonian to destroy giant bones, right? But I love this quote. This is from a book called The Death of Expertise. Rebecca, do you want to read that?
Yeah, it says conspiracy theories are frustratingly precisely because they are so intricate. Each rejoinder or contradiction only produces a more complicated theory. Conspiracy theorists manipulate all tangible evidence to fit their explanation, but worse, they will also point to the absence of evidence as even stronger confirmation. After all, what better sign of a really effective conspiracy is there than a complete lack of any trace that the conspiracy exists? Facts, the absence of facts, contradictory facts, everything is proof. Nothing can ever challenge the underlying belief. We see this in a lot of arenas in Mormonism, post-Mormonism. That's very well said. Great quote.
No, I love that. Every time I get asked occasionally to talk about chemtrails and stuff like that, and I always bust out this quote.
That's good.
And so the reason why I bring this up is because as we move in to look at the literalist apologists, okay, they will take anything that's thrown out there that even remotely echoes what they want, and they will throw it out there as fact uncritically. So we're gonna show that, and again, we're gonna laugh at this stuff, but the reason why I show it is because people believe this. Okay, so we're gonna laugh, but at the same time, it's like, come on, really, damn. So because literalism is not tied to fact, anything becomes proof. So the literalists at the Firm Foundation, I'm just going to give a couple of examples of their dedication to integrity. On their website a while ago, in 2014, they linked to an article claiming that a Viking ship had been found in the river outside of Memphis, Tennessee. And this is the picture that they have. Here's a Viking sword, which was found in a Viking ship in Memphis, Tennessee. Okay. The article that they quoted was the World News Daily Report, which is a parody website. Okay. So this is actually on their website. I actually think that this is in one of the Firm Foundation's books too. This is the article that they quoted as fact for people. And the purpose of them quoting this is to say, look, you can't trust archaeologists. You can't trust the Smithsonian because this stuff is here and no one's telling you about it, but we are. Okay. So what they're doing is saying that there's all kinds of secret history out there that is out there, but it's being hid by intellectuals in the church or intellectuals, at the Smithsonian. Had they actually looked at the article before they did their knee-jerk reaction just to say, okay, hey, let's post this, the website says this is a parody site. It says all news articles contained are fiction and presumably fake news. Any resemblance to the truth is purely coincidental, except for all references to politicians or celebrities, which are based on real people. Okay, but still mostly fiction. This page was making fun of itself, and they went through and took the idea, put it in here, and then they went to go find a picture of a sword. Now, this article didn't have a picture of a sword, so they had to find one to put on their website to back up the claim. So what they did is they went to an actual archaeological discovery and pulled the picture from Scotland, inserted it in their website, and then dubbed it with the article from the World Net Daily News, so that they could tell people that there was alternative history and that people shouldn't trust scientists.
Yeah, and I bet this is being passed around from faithful people, probably to post-Mormons who are saying, no, there isn't. And they're like, yes, there is. And then it just becomes a literal fact because it's on the firm foundation. Doesn't matter where it came from or what you just said. There it is. It exists.
And the danger in this is the fact that there is so much of this out there. I see all the time on the web, and I go, can that be true? Is that right? And then you have to do a lot of backup because your natural inclination is to believe something when you see it. Why would somebody be trying to fool me? But it is rampant, and then it becomes where you don't trust any source. Yep. And then the church people say, well, you can't trust any source, so I can trust the prophet, and I can trust the Book of Mormon.
But you can trust your trusted sources, but never take counsel from those who don't believe.
Yep.
Well, and you can also trust no evidence because it doesn't exist. So when you don't see it, it's completely trustworthy. There's no way to debunk it.
You can't see it, but you can feel it.
Yeah, you do feel it. That's absolutely true.
So further on the Firm Foundation's website, they have a section where they take 19th century ironwork blast furnaces from the Hopewell State Park in Pennsylvania, and they label them as ancient blast furnaces. Okay, and that's how they have it. It's the remains of a ruined ancient blast furnace. Now this is funny because I showed this to my friend Sarah, and she started laughing immediately. It's the image that they took was literally from the website of Hopewell Furnace National Historic Site. And the website says specifically that this furnace was made in 1788.
19th century coal furnaces. Yeah.
Yep. Now, to show you how common these coal furnaces are, this is one 16 miles from my house.
Oh, my goodness.
I literally hiked around this on Saturday. Okay. So these are everywhere. Now, the Firm Foundation, they're like, oh, well, those are ancient blast furnaces. These were coal. These were made to make coke for ironwork.
And this is on their website right now, saying that it is an ancient.
Yeah. So this image, this is actually
right there. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and that tracks because that same visit that we paid to the Church History Museum, they have that part where they say you want to heft the plates, so. The replica. So Landon hefts it and he's like, this is very light metal. And the same guide said, well, the Nephites and Lamanites were great metallurgists. They had these, implying blast furnace, and they were, smeltering, and they were, so Kambaga. This tracks with what they're trying to say. They had this huge industry built up, although they didn't.
Yep.
And this is actually proof against the Book of Mormon because if you've been in Utah, there's coke ovens everywhere. Mm-hmm. They would literally cut down forests and put them in these coke ovens that you light them on fire and they burn for like a week or two and turn into this ash that was then used to make the furnaces, to make the iron, make the steel. You would see evidences
of the infrastructure
of these furnaces. There'd be remnants that you would find for anyone who was making this. And they know that. And so that's why they have to put these pictures in there, because people are going to raise the question, where are the furnaces? Where's the infrastructure to make this?
Yeah.
So, well, here we're showing you, but they have to take something that is modern and put it in there and tell you, oh, this is ancient. Yeah, it's ancient in that it's 200 years old, but that is not ancient.
Well, and think about the Book of Mormon. Every time it says, 2,000 of us raised our swords. This sword here, there's an awful lot of infrastructure, like you said, Landon, to create this sword. There are people, there are mechanisms, there are furnaces, there are forests cut down, there are debris piles just to get this sword. Right. And those are nowhere.
That's right. So the last one I'm going to point out here is the firm foundation. They will use quotes from DeWitt Clinton, who we talked about earlier. You talked about on your last episode. And they will quote the book, which I showed you earlier, the Memoirs of the Antiquities. And I'm going to show you the quote. This is the quote down here, but we're going to go to a bigger one. So this quote is previous superior native cultures. This is from their website. It says the battles are described. Now this is the document that I showed you where DeWitt Clinton was talking about the fact that these populations existed and they had built these forts. It says the battles are described as having culminated in the destruction of previous superior native cultures, which had taken final refuge in the forts on top of the hills, including the general region of the hill known to Mormons as Cumorah, in the town of Camulus, in the same county of, so it goes on next. So this is that quote. This is stunning. This is the actual document. In the town of Camulus, okay, see that right there?
Yep.
This entire sentence, this reference to Mormonism, they added to the text for their website.
I was going to say, how would Clinton be speaking about this before the Mormons if it was 1817? But that's So yeah.
This document, the document that they are quoting from, was published in 1820. And they went through and inserted a direct reference to Mormonism and the Hill Cumorah into a document talking about the Moundbuilder myth.
Which had nothing to do with Mormonism. It's just what everybody was talking about in the day. Here it is mentioned years before. Wow, that is damning.
This goes right along with what we were talking about with Ganesh on our episode this week, where, we can show Brigham Young changing things to make the narrative work. We saw Joseph Smith. This is an LDS Mormon thing.
Mormons have to.
They change the narrative to convince people that it works. And this is unconscionable that somebody would take this, add words in to make you believe it, and call themselves, LDS researchers. Is despicable.
Yep.
It was implied. I'm sure it was implied here by Clinton. He was implying that.
They're inserting quotes into a document which perpetuated scientific racism about populations being less than the white populations.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really vile. And they don't look at this and go, oh my gosh, do you know what they're actually talking about? They go, oh, well, this quote supports our claim. This quote supports our claim. And they put that stuff together. So, we sit and we laugh about this. But why does any of that matter? We talked about the history of these narratives. We talked about the fact that these literal people will put the stuff together. Why does it matter? It matters because people believe it. And they will peddle these lies and they will make stuff up in order to believe it. And in order to do that, they will carry through quotes and sources tied to scientific racism, tied to the concepts from the 19th century, which have been proven false. But they will create this content to get you to believe that the Book of Mormon is true.
No, you're describing my parents. And, it was very disturbing once I got older and realized what they were really reading and what they were talking about. It sounded really cool to me as a kid. It sounded very intelligent and intellectual. And then I started, to realize what it was, but they were so immersed in it. One of the last times I visited my mom before she passed away, she had a book on her table. I go, what are you doing? She goes, oh, I'm just, teaching myself Reformed Egyptian, just reviewing. It was so real to these people who were scientists, my parents. They could not believe anything other than all of that. It was an absolute fact, absolute reality.
Yep.
And we get this all the time. In fact, we'll probably get comments during this episode where people will come out and say, everything you said is false. Go read Wayne Mays. He's fantastic on this subject. And you're going,
okay,
what's this guy? Who, what degree does he have? Where's this coming from? We're talking to a PhD in this area, but no, this guy knows it,
So I'm going to go off on a very brief tangent. Okay. So they love to do that. They're like, go look at Wayne May. He agrees with us. They'll point to this document here, E.G. Squires. They have a list of the documents that they'll use from, and Wayne May does this too, these quotes that they have from the 19th century. And they'll say, look, all these books from the 19th century confirm the Book of Mormon. No, they don't. Quoting a document from the 19th century only quotes that the common ideas of the 19th century are reflected in the Book of Mormon. It doesn't support the claim. You're quoting documents that influence the book, right?
That's it.
But they do that all the time, and it drives me nuts. So, tangent done. I'm calm.
No, I know. No, this is leveled better people than we. I can, think of an interview once with Rod Meldrum that literally sent somebody down a spiral. I mean, you get upset when you're like a reasonable thinking person and you just are faced with this. You have to walk away sometimes.
Yeah, during my TBM days, I actually published a book with Boyd Tuttle at Digital Legend. So Meldrum and I had the same publisher at one point. Oh. And I got a copy of one of his first books on this, and I read it and I was like, this is garbage. Anyway, back to Meldrum and this is the picture that kicked off my rabbit hole. This is from the Book of Mormon, from the Firm Foundation's website, and it says Hopewell Nephite Bone Pits of New York. Okay, so this image is perpetuated by the Firm Foundation, by Meldrum, by Book of Mormon Evidences as being proof of bone pits, fortifications, the mass death of Nephites in New York State. And I saw this picture and I was like, there's no way that exists in New York, or else it would be huge. So I did a Google search for this image. And they use this all the time. So this is Book of Mormon Evidences on Facebook. This is Firm Foundation. This is a Google match. You can see where the Book of Mormon Evidences uses this picture on multiple articles. Okay. And then the other one is, one of these is Wayne May's group, Lost American Antiquities. So I think that's actually Wayne May. Okay. So they're all using the same image. So I'm like, okay, where did this image come from? Where are they stealing this from? It's not Nephite. It's not New York. This is actually from the Crow Creek massacre site in North Dakota that was discovered in 1979.
Oh my goodness.
So this is a massacre that happened in 1325. 500 Native Americans were attacked, butchered, and then dumped into a ditch by other Native Americans. Okay. And so it was discovered in 1981. So this is actually a copy, the best copy I could get of the original study done by University of South Dakota. And I was like, okay. So I started to dig some more. The image that they take is this one right here. And the image was used in multiple medical studies where they're looking at the bone density of these massacre victims, trying to figure out what caused the massacre. And what they found, but by studying the bones, is they could find that there was mass starvation. And so these populations were warring against each other for resources. So the otolarynghic osteopathology in the 14th century, that was a article that was published on this. This is the actual article here. A second article was published in 1997 where they took looking at the bone mineral density. And again, this study uses the same image. So what these people are doing to fuel the literalism, where they have to produce something that says that there's evidence of mass death near the Hill Cumorah. And so they're taking the image of a massacre of actual Native populations, taking them completely out of context, robbing these victims of their story, their heritage, whitewashing the whole thing, and superimposing a very Western Mormon interpretation of their life on top of them, thus erasing these people's actual history. Okay. So
were you able to trace it all? Like who used it first? Because I can see just people reposting going, oh, this was on Firm. It must be, I wonder, maybe someday when we have more time. But I mean, it just seems extremely egregious to grab a picture that clearly is not what it says, the first person to do it. Someone had to really intentionally do
Google,
that. I think maybe other people reposted it. And I also say, if this were true, if there were a picture like this, the church itself would be publishing this.
Yes.
Here it is.
Yeah.
Here it is. The church doesn't publish anything like this and does not weigh in on any of it. And like Landon and I learned from Book of Mormon Central, and it's not on their website anymore, but 2 years ago, it says, we do the things and put out the things that the church can't, because we can pivot quickly, meaning we put out the junk science that, gives you faith, gives you that warm feeling. But if it were real, if they really had found Nephi's house, like they've claimed on some of these sites, they would be talking about it at conference. They are dying for some kind of physical evidence, and there is none.
And we know from Book of Mormon Central that they made that set of videos, the preponderance of the evidence,
greatness of the evidence.
Greatness of the evidence. And we sat and watched that, and here they were, the first one. They went to Mesoamerica,
and
Mexico,
and
they're down there, and they say, oh, look, this is a lake, and it was caused when a landslide, and the lake filled up and it buried. This is exactly what's described in the Book of Mormon. We went right to our Google to that name of that city and found out, that mudslide happened, hundreds and hundreds of years after the Book of Mormon. Yep. So this, yes, no doubt.
Because that's what post-Mormons do. We're like, let's
you're
find
linking
out
it and saying, see, this is proof that happened. As if
and then he held
mudslides don't happen.
Remember how he held up a pot from the lake?
He held up a pot and said, this could be Nephi.
Could this be? And Landon's like, I'm going to look that up. He's like, nope, landslide was much later.
We watched this with Dr. Lundwall, and he went right to it and said, no, this is this date. This came from 1,000 years later, but they're using it as proof. And then they went to another place and this could be, or something like this shows.
According to my old Elders Quorum president, we have Nephite mounds in Ashton, Kentucky. So, I mean, that's what's coming down.
Well, they actually went to the mounds and said, look, and they read out of the Book of Mormon, there were piles of dirt, and they said, piles of dirt. See,
and remember by the very last episode, they literally said, we all are a part of the Book of Mormon history in every country in the world, every corner. It could be in anyone's backyard. Because it's nowhere, it can be everywhere. So you can get shivery about it in Turkey, or wherever you want to be. And that just reduces it to absurdity to a thinking person. It's just ludicrous.
No, I watched that. I watched your video on it. I watched RFM's video on it. But one of these days, I'm gonna meet John Lundwall because I love him, and
we're gonna hook you up. Are you ever coming to? You should come to Sunstone. You should
let us know when you're in town. We do dinner with John all the time. So
that would be really fun. He'd love to meet you guys. Would just Landon and I would just kind of fade into the background.
All right, let's. I still got more slides. I got to roll through these, or else we're
I know. Sorry, this is such a great topic. Go ahead.
This is going to turn into a Mormon stories episode.
It's all right. It's okay.
Okay, so let's take a look at what evidence should we find or should have been found that would support the narrative. But what kind of projects have taken place over the last 200 years that would likely have turned up this material? Okay. The Book of Mormon says these people were killed. Their bodies were left to sit on the ground. They moldered on the earth is a specific term. So that means that those bodies, they decomposed. If I can go into my backyard and find this in my backyard, which I did like 2 weeks ago, then the odds are that if they had this material, they would still be in the ground there, and they would be, about 2 to 3 feet down. But we're going to take a look at what kind of construction projects have taken place in that region, how much dirt was moved, how much growth there was. And then we're going to say, if we really had this much death, what are the odds of none of it being found? So let's roll on into this.
Yeah. And this was the brilliant angle that I first picked up on from his research on, like, you're right. This land has been done to death over the last couple hundred years. So this is great.
According to the Book of Mormon, church leaders, literalist positions held by church members, and apologist groups, 2 civilizations met their death around Wayne County and Ontario County, New York. The Jaredite mass extinction happened sometime between 600 BC and 300 BC. And in that text, it's 2 million people met their death. Now, it could be more because it says 2 million of our best warriors plus their women and children. So it could be like if they had 2 kids, it could be 6 million people. Okay. And then the book of so Ether 15:2. There had been slayed by the sword already 2 million of his people. He began to sorrow. 2 million mighty men, also their wives and their children. So the most common number is 2 million. If we say 2 million plus wives and kids, which means like certainly the entire population, 6-8 million people, maybe. Okay. So but if we're just talking about that 2 million number, that means that the battle in the Jaredite case wiped out the entire population of West Virginia. Okay, which West Virginia is only 170,000 people, 1,700,000 people,
and this is just the Jaredite battle.
This is just the Jaredite battle. Now, mind you, I live right here, right on that side of the river. So the Jaredite battle would have wiped out the entire population of West Virginia, or if you combine North and South Dakota, everybody in both states, according to the 2025 populations. Number of Nephites. So in like fashion, the Book of Mormon states that the Nephites and Lamite battle extinction happened somewhere around 400 AD. The number given by the church is 230,000 people. And that's combatants, right? In Vogel's first book on Joseph Smith, he has a footnote in there where he points out that other scholars from BYU have pointed out that it could be way more. It could have been 600,000 people, because they took the time to do what John Lundwall did and talk about what kind of infrastructure has to exist to move an army this big. All right. And you're going to have your warriors, and you're going to have your shepherds, and you're going to have your butchers, and you're going to have your leather worker, and you're going to have your horse trainers and your chariot makers, and you're going to move that entire population. So it would have been much more than this. But the number we're going to go with for our purposes is 2,230,000 people in this area. So according to the claims of the text, there should be evidence for 2 million people in the soil. Now, mind you, 2,230,000 is the entire population of Houston, Texas right now. So if you took every single person out, killed them, and left them all on the streets, that's what this would look like.
And then go to Texas and find zero evidence that Houston ever existed.
That's right.
It's not possible. And you can say they were an army, they were moving. An army doesn't just move and fight. They move, they prepare, they gather, like you said, the butchers, the infrastructure has to catch up to them, and they literally build a city before they go to battle. Right. It may be a tent city, but you've got garbage, you've got cooking gears, you've got all of that stuff that's going to be left behind and is going to be found.
Yeah, there has to be something. So we're actually going to look at an example from Germany, which is a perfect test case for what we should see. But so how does the development of transportation systems in the region highlight the lack of physical evidence? Because the development of transportation turns soil all the time. Okay, so this is actually from BYU. Will you read that first quote for me, Landon?
Can we account for the discrepancies in the number and size of sites reported for New York and our expectations from the Book of Mormon account by considering how many were plowed under? No. In practical terms, the only way buried sites can be found is when they are partially destroyed during normal urban or rural activities, such as a sewer line encountering burials in downtown Salt Lake City. Archaeologists are drawn to land disturbance like moths to a light because they have a chance to see what is beneath the surface without digging blindly.
Yeah, so that comes from BYU studies. The next quote here is from New York State archaeologist Ann Morton. She states that archaeologists do much of their work in response to potential construction. Okay, so people go out, they're staking stuff off, they're preparing land. Somebody strikes something. Again, those laws exist where if you're receiving federal funds at all, you have to shut everything down. They call it the archaeologist. So we know from BYU itself and the state archaeologists in New York that the response, that much of their work is done in response to construction. So this is just a couple of articles. So this is from Washington State. This is from this year. City of Walla Walla identifies human remains found during work near Pioneer Park. This was an indigenous person that they found. Second article, this is from Wisconsin. Oshkosh road construction delayed as archaeologists unearth extensive Native American village.
It happened at the Mountain Meadows Massacre site when they were trying to rebuild it. And here we go, more bones, right? And you do have to shut everything down.
Well, in 2000, they were working on the Salt Lake Airport, and they found a site out there that was 3,000 years old. And so they had to shut down work there too. A couple more examples. So this is 2 years ago. They found a 1,200-year-old Native American village during a Tempe, Arizona construction project. So they had to shut that down. So they got the archaeologists out there working on that. Indigenous remains found during Twin Port Exchange construction up in Michigan, and indigenous human remains found in Duluth, North Dakota.
This is a problem for construction, isn't it?
Huge.
I mean,
because every time you hit one of these, you have
like
to call corner.
Nightmare.
Yeah, it shuts everything down.
Do you remember, Landon, that we talked to one of the temple architects from Peru? He mentioned that there had been, was it in Chile? There was some kind of grave site, and that the temple construction.
Cemetery.
Yeah, just went ahead. Maybe you don't report in other countries so much, but it seems like anywhere you dig, you're going to come up with something eventually. And the thing about the Book of Mormon scenario is it's such a concentrated area. I mean, it's like right there. So
yeah, I mean, and think about it, and I'll show some pictures here in a second. But if you have your armies fighting at Cumorah, your frontline people are going to be there, but your support staff, they're not going to be at the battlefront. They're going to be scattered throughout the region. Okay, and the Book of Mormon narratives has armies coming from all over, right? He's like, and so-and-so showed up with his 10,000, and Lemur showed up with his 10,000, and Jake showed up with his 10. So they wouldn't have all been coming on the same trail. And you would have had these different armies camped different areas, because they wouldn't just come and go into one mass conglomeration, because that would cause chaos among the ranks. So they would stay separated like normal army units do. So the idea that they just were all in this one little place and we've never found anything because we're not looking in the exact right spot, when you're talking about armies that were moving back and forth and setting up camp and sending messengers and hunting for food to support, it's garbage. The logic behind it is so bad. So before I get going, I'm calm. Let's
garbage. Well, at least we got an hour in before we use the word garbage. So that it makes me wonder how they're reforesting the Hill Cumorah. You know, they're planting trees all over it. If they just don't want people to look at it and go, maybe there's something in there. You know, if there's trees all around, you're not going to think, you can't really dig. I wonder if they're trying to just do a little bit of a smoke screen.
Here's the thought. When they're planting those trees, they're turning that land over with shovels.
Exactly. Yeah. They have all kinds of service projects. Yeah, nothing.
But yeah, no, we're lucky with how frustrated I get that we got an hour into this without me swearing.
Yeah, so that's good.
Well, we actually asked this question. I think you called the church architect to ask about this, because they built a temple there, and
I did ask.
So before you build a temple, if this is a known battle site.
Oh, dude, you're getting ahead of me.
Okay, well, we'll wait then.
But I checked with the former church temple architect to see if they had to shut anything down while building that temple. And I'll give you the answer when we get into what you're talking about.
I guarantee you there was no archaeological survey done. You know how I know?
And the thing is, they weren't
I pulled the records.
That's what we asked too.
They weren't worried about it. Like, you would think if you knew that was your battle site and you were going to build a temple, you'd be going, we're not going to be able to do this very easily because we're going to run into everything. Yeah. It was never discussed. They know there's nothing there. Yeah, never discussed.
Right. So let's talk about projects that changed the landscape. So like you guys talked about in your last episode, with the guy who talks about the canal. Palmyra was not a backwards podunk place. The invention of the canal brought civilization to the frontier. And so these projects, they expanded the city. It grew very fast. The construction of the Erie Canal was a national and worldwide phenomenon. Nothing like this had been done previously. Okay, and so the Erie Canal, the construction takes place 4.5 miles north of Cumorah. Okay, so literally just a few miles from Joseph's house. So while Joseph is a kid, he's seeing this happen. Okay. And so opening in 1825 during Joseph's youth, the original canal was about 4 feet deep, 40 feet wide, and had a 10-foot path on both sides for mules. To accommodate the increasing boat traffic, they expanded it several times. So by the time they were done expanding it in about 1918, That channel goes from 4 feet deep to about 12 to 23 feet deep, from 40 feet wide to almost 200 feet wide. Okay. And the locks were 300 feet. So as you're moving this channel through, it's not all a laminar surface. You're moving people through locks, which means you're moving more earth for the locks than you are necessary for other stuff. So you're taking out a huge amount of earth.
Mm-hmm. And now, you're going down really far.
Really far, 23 feet.
Yeah. That's...
Also, in 1910, they moved the canal. It was moved 300 feet to the north. And so you have this area where they excavated this huge area beforehand, 200 feet, 23 feet for 9 miles across the city. Okay. And then they move that 300 feet to the north, which means they do that process again. Okay. This is the actual channel right here. So accordingly, over the course of about 100 years, between 1817 and 1918, construction crews were consistently excavating, engineering, and digging up a 400-mile stretch of land that cuts directly across the key areas involved in the Book of Mormon narrative. Okay, so looking at the Palmyra section of the canal, in a little over 100 years, they moved more than 60 million cubic feet of earth to build and expand that canal. And that's assuming that it's an 8-mile stretch that's 12 feet deep by 120 feet wide. Okay, which it is going through there pretty consistently. And so this picture actually shows some of the equipment that was used in the early 20th century to work on that area. This picture comes from the Palmyra Historical Society.
And had they found artifacts of a great battle and millions of people, I mean, maybe they didn't have the same protocols then, but it definitely would have been documented. And people were very interested in archaeology. There would have been a record that these kinds of things were discovered in that wide stretch right across the Book of Mormon land.
The museums in Syracuse, New York would be full of materials. The museum in Palmyra would be full of materials. Yeah. So yeah, if it had been found, even if they didn't have a protection-based concept,
right,
it would still be there. There would have been archaeologists, because during this period of time, you had archaeologists who were advocating for protection of the mounds. Mm-hmm. That's how the mounds in Chillicothe, Ohio, were saved during the First World War. They built Camp Sherman over the top of the mounds, and the archaeologists were like, "Hey, look, don't build on these." So there were people. And if you would have found swords and all this other stuff that fueled American romanticism for the history of their new land, well, then this would have changed the landscape. But this went through anyway.
And I also feel there were amateur archaeologists, people that would just find things, and they would eventually find their ways into museums years later. I mean, it would be there.
Here in Utah, Fremont Indian State Park in central Utah, they were digging I-70 and went right through the middle of a Fremont Indian site that was about 1,000 years old, I think, in that. And there's now a museum on site.
That's right.
With artifacts that they uncovered while they made the freeway. And this is a village of maybe a couple hundred people.
Yeah.
And you've got a museum filled with artifacts. We're talking about 2 million people
at least
here, and not a single artifact.
That's right. More importantly, 2 million people, which would have proven previous concepts. So the books that talked about the Moundbuilder myth would have been paraded as historical fact, and that narrative would have been what we learned about as kids.
That's true, and that's outside of Mormonism. They would have just been absolutely thrilled to find some evidence that supported, like the president was saying, like Clifford was saying, or Clinton, whatever his name was. Yeah, exactly. You're right. So aside from Mormonism, they would have loved to find all these things.
Correct. So this is just down from Palmyra. This is the building of the lock, but you can see the building of the lock was a wider process than actually just digging the channel. So it wasn't just, hey, we're going to dig a ditch. These locks were massive. All right, so we've got the canal. We've got that 60 million square feet. We got the continual work on that. They expanded it. Construction crews for more than 100 years work on it. And then on top of that, we have the expansion of rail. Okay, so we're talking about 6 different railroads, which at some point in time were cutting across the county. Okay, which means as they go through the process of making the railroad, the first thing that they're going to do is they're going to clear land. Okay, they're going to take trees out. They're going to cut hills in half. They're going to clear everything in the way because they want that surface to be as smooth as possible until they get to a hill that they can't level. All right. This is how a lot of Indian mounds were destroyed. Okay. They would go through and they would just cut and they would just take things apart. And workers who were working on the railways, they would take the arrowheads out, stuff like that, and pilfer them. And these mounds were destroyed. Okay. But this is the Lehigh Valley Railroad, and you can see different arms of it cut all throughout the entire area. And the area we're talking about, Palmyra, is actually right here. Okay. So a lot of traffic going through these lines, construction crews going through these lines. And these were built in order. Oh, hold on a second. I keep trying to move my image here. Starting in about 1850. Okay, 1850, 1853, you have the Rochester and Syracuse. You have the Southern Railroad in Sodus Bay. These are cutting all across Wayne County. Okay. The Ontario shoreline in 1876. Another railroad is opened in 1844. Between 1900 and 1908, they start building electric railroads in Wayne County. And then the Lehigh Valley Railroad, changed the landscape and goes down past Cumorah into Ontario County. So again, we have 6 different major construction projects which leveled land, cleared forests, took over farmland to create transportation systems that would have turned up something during the process of cutting that land and leveling it out. Okay.
I just had this thought that I bet Joseph Smith really believed that the artifacts were there. He probably, I used to think, okay, he fabricated it, but now I kind of realize he believed that narrative that was there, that everybody believed. He put, names to it and created more of a fabricated story. But I feel like he would have believed that those things were there from the past.
I think he believed the contemporary narrative.
Right.
But I think he knew he was making his part of it up.
Yeah, I think that's true. But he wouldn't be concerned anybody digging. He'd go, yeah, they'll find stuff because that's a fact. It's there.
The Kinderhook plates are a perfect example of this.
Oh, yes.
They go out, they find the Kinderhook plates, they bring them to him. And in the history of the church, he treats them as real. He believed that they were them. He says, oh, these are from a Jaredite or whoever from the loins of Ham, right? And then he just kind of drops it and walks away. So the magic worldview, the mound builder mysticism was very real for him, to the point where he wasn't critical or immediately suspicious of something that turned up that could be real. So
the same thing. The same thing happened to me, though, as a believing member. I was reading about DNA and the advances being made in DNA research, and I was excited because I said, oh, they're going to be able to prove in just a few years that Native Americans did come from there, because I believe the narrative, and therefore I believe that when the science catches up, it's going to prove what I believe.
That's
and
right.
Of course,
I did the same thing.
That was one of my shelf breaking items, is when it turned up that it completely the opposite. And that's kind of here.
Yep.
He believed it was going to show up, but it absolutely didn't, disproving and discrediting the belief.
So this is 1904. So this is Route 21. This is that road that runs right next to Cumorah. If you've been up there, it runs through Wayne and Ontario counties. This is one of the original maps from 1904. But you'll take a look here. One, that hill is completely deforested.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at the fields around it, all of those are tilled over and over and over again. Once or twice a year, the farmers are turning over these fields. And then when they finally come in to lay the road, they carve all this out and they carve downwards so that they can lay the road. So they're going to put the foundation for the road. They're going to lay the road on top of that. So roads flatten counties. Okay. So the development of major highways in this area takes off about the mid-1930s. And then as they pave these roads and cut everything in, they widen the roads so that swath goes. So instead of just taking that 12-foot, wagon cart that they had, now it's a 2-lane road, a 4-lane road. So they're expanding it. They're cutting out more of that surface. And what they're effectively doing is just cutting lines across the county, multiple lines. So canals and trains and country roads and driveways, and all of these things are basically taking test samples throughout the entire region. They're building houses, they're putting foundations in, they're building all this stuff. And these if we looked at these as exploratory concepts, if you have 2,230,000 people dead in an area, these exploratory surgeries are going to find something. Never have they found anything. We take a look at Route 90. This is 2 miles south of Hill Cumorah. This is a major interstate. The work on this major interstate moved a lot of earth. Nothing came out of it. So projects that were funded since 1966 would have to be in the historical record. The National Environmental Protection Act applies if a project receives any kind of federal funds. This is for water, rail, telecom pipeline, reclamation. Upon discovery of human remains, any project that receives money from the federal government, even if it's through a grant or a secondhand grant, has to shut down, report it to the coroner, call out the archaeologist. That's when the state archaeologist comes in. They'll come in and they'll take a look at they'll take a look and they'll say, okay, you need a level 1 archaeological survey. And that survey will basically take a look at the land and say what is necessary. And if they find anything else, they will actually assign an archaeologist to it. They'll delay that project and they'll go in and excavate. So you can search for these. So before I get back to that, let's take another step. Farmers, the unsung heroes of archaeology. So according to Stacy I can't pronounce the last name. We're just going to call her Stacy T. Archaeologist with the Michigan State Historical Preservation Office. Farmers plowing their fields are the ones who make the most finds for artifacts in that region of the country. Okay. Farming is not much different in both these locations, but she says farmers have made some of the most important scientific and cultural discoveries in our region. Why? Because farmers are turning the soil all the time. And so this is just a few articles from the last few years where farmers have found, farmland holds buried Indian secrets, farm field rewrites, archaeological history of Michigan. This guy here, Arrowhead Whisperer, a stunning Indian artifact collection found on farmland. So, the amount of farmland that we have there, as of the last census, Wayne and Ontario County are routinely farming more than 400,000 acres every single year. Okay. If you go back to 1900, those two counties were farming 768,000 acres. Okay. So that's miles and miles of square farmland that's being turned over all the time. And when a piece of land goes out of farming, it goes to become a subdivision. The people in that subdivision come in, they mill it out, they dig foundations, all that stuff. All of this land has been dug up over and over and over again for the last 300 years. And we have found nothing that matches the claims of the text and the literalist view.
Although I feel like sometimes try to make it fit, like the Arrowhead collection, right? I can see people they're pretty loose with the dates and things like that, and just say, look, here are arrows, from
2 million arrowheads.
Battle. Yeah, that's it.
So there's actually articles from the Firm Foundation where they're like, so-and-so, brother so-and-so in 1900 said that, that they were selling buckets of arrowheads to people. Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, so people, they know Mormons are coming there to take a look at the history. Yeah. They happen to have buckets. They're selling you what you're going to buy. So these people are going there, they're buying these arrowheads going back to Utah. This is a Nephite arrowhead.
That's right. It's kind of like the altar in Adamon Diamond. I can't even say it anymore, right? Where I heard anecdotally that the senior missionaries, people like to take rocks from it when they visit. Yep. They're like, oh, I have a piece of it. And at night, the senior missionaries go and they pile more rocks from another place and say, this is the altar of Adam, right? Of course, they're backtracking from that. But yeah, the idea of the artifact is very important to have something, but it's, it's a farce.
So we're going to look at real fast. I'm going to try to sum this up. Church-centric development. So we're looking at 1994 in the top here. And then we're looking at 2023 here. So you can see in support of the Palmyra Temple for the 50 acres that sits on, that's cultivated, the church building, the Sacred Grove development, the Sacred Grove Visitor Center. We've got development of they took all this farmland, which was all, tilled for years. They dug foundations in here. They've built this entire area out. Visitor center, a temple, ward buildings, public roads, bishop storehouse, private access roads, walkways, excavated and graded land, subterranean power, sewer lines required for operation. All of these went into the properties which you see here. This is the map of the properties that the church owns in that area. Okay.
Yeah. And I found my conversation with the former temple architect is very quick. I wrote to this person and said, I'm trying to determine if there was any kind of archaeological digging or assessing of the site there before they put the temple up. If everybody believes this is the site of the big battle, wouldn't that have been done prior to putting up the temple, right? If you believe that that was there, you would think that would factor into it. And the architect says, my division did a lot of historic restoration, recreation, or recreation construction in Palmyra, and I don't remember any specific archaeological work or artifacts at the time. They didn't even factor into what they might have found, right? And then they said, on the other hand, we did extensive archaeological work on the Provo City Center Temple and uncovered a lot that related to the 19th century Mormon activity on that block. So it's like the church knew they would find things there, having to do with pioneers. They weren't worried at all about construction in Palmyra because they know there's nothing to find.
And also, if they were to do it and they brought in archaeologists and those papers were published, guess what happens? It undercuts the entire argument. So
and that happened in Mesoamerica with BYU sending archaeologists out there who basically lost their testimony, and then they just quietly said, we're not going to work these projects anymore.
Yep. Archaeological surveys. So we're going to talk about that just real fast. The New York Cultural Resource Information System, the CRIS system, you can go and you can search the entire area and find Native American sites. You can find archaeological surveys. So I did that. So the only archaeological survey involved with any of the properties that the church owns are these two right here. This is what's available for public access. If there's something behind a paywall or a academic institution access, I don't have access to. But what you can access on CRIS clearly shows two archaeological surveys, but they are both for the Joseph Smith log home excavations. Okay, so this one right here, this is the log home, and this is the home site. Okay,
and that's current quote artifacts, things in the last 100 or so years. You're going to find his teacup. You're going to find some baby shoes. You're going to find that kind of stuff. Yeah, and they know that's there, so they're looking for it, but they've never looked for what they also claim has to be there by saying the Book of Mormon is literal.
Yeah, so I'm going to pull back, but this is the Palmyra temple site. Okay, so the ward house is then up here. The Sacred Grove places, I think, right here. So next one, we're going to pull back a little bit. This is a quote from John E. Clark. He says, "I am unaware of any archaeological investigation of the hill itself, but sufficient information is available for the surrounding region to make critical assessment. Mormon's Hill and Moroni's Hill are not the same one." Okay, so that's them saying this, but this is the Hill Cumorah Center right here. This is the Bishop Storehouse. There was a archaeological survey done for the Bishop Storehouse, and there was one done for this. Now, all of these other archaeological surveys, all these green lines you see here, those are all surveys done for the Manchester Gas Company. That's it. Okay. So if there is stuff done there, there's no public record of it that you can find through New York State, which would employ the archaeologists. And again, there may be something behind the institutional access I don't have access to, but if there was evidence in the soil, there would be archaeological surveys for it. So have there been discoveries made in this region? Yes, there's a lot of sites in the region. The Robinson site is 70 miles east of Palmyra. It dates from 1000 to 2999 BC. Items have been found there. 12 miles to the west of Palmyra, you have the Seneca sites, Ganondagan State Historic Site, as well as I can't even say these words. I really don't want to destroy them with the way white people. Yeah. And then, these three sites are all within an hour of Palmyra. Most of these sites are all Seneca Indians. Okay. Indians, God, Jim, I swear, indigenous populations. Arrowhead finds are common in the area, but mean nothing. Okay. Finding an arrowhead means you found an arrowhead. It means at some point in time, the population there made arrowheads. This is a collection of arrowheads that were found at or near the Hill Cumorah. This is from a study from BYU, a study in the Hill Cumorah. Very fascinating paper, by the way. And it says, one of the old Indian trails, which became the route of the first road of the white man in this area from Canandaigua Lake, 2 miles south of the hill to Lake Ontario, 22 miles north passing the nose of the Hill Cumorah. The finding of Indian arrow and spearheads in great quantities on the slopes of the hill and the fields surrounding indicates that long after the great battle which the Nephites were annihilated, the Hill Cumorah has been an important battleground. Okay, so that's John D. Giles' personal writings. He was one of the first caretakers of the Hill Cumorah plot, so he wrote some of the first books on it. Now, there are more than 50 projectile heads found in the state of New York, different types, okay? None of these, and you can go to this website here, projectile points, it'll go through and it'll show you each of the designs that was found in the state, where they're from, what time period they're from. So this is how the Book of Mormon video, the church's video, depicts the final battle at Cumorah, okay? Iron spear tips, leather armor, a Roman gladius right here, okay?
Yeah.
And this is what they're actually pulling out of the ground. So this is a collection of arrowheads. This is from the Finger Lakes region. This is from the Facebook New York Projectile Point Hunters. So this is somebody displaying their collection.
We look at this every time we go to, we like going to these museums, and every time we look for anything that's metal and never find it. It's always bone, stone. It is a stone culture. It is not a metal culture.
So the Hopewell, the Hopewell and some populations in Michigan did have limited hammered copper. And in some of the burial mounds, they will find copper head plates that were placed ceremonially upon death. So we do have evidence of very limited use. In Ohio and New York, these copper plates were excavated in Michigan, which means when other populations were coming down to the Hopewell sites for pilgrimages, they were bringing these pieces back. And they found seashells from Florida up there. So these populations traded. So there was limited metal use, but it was never, they didn't make weapons out of it. It was ceremonial, and it was reserved for the highest portions of the population. Your average indigenous population living by the Ohio River didn't have these things, but often they were buried with very, very important people. Now, the Firm Foundation will say, oh, look, they got this brass. They will use ceremonial dressings for the dead as proof of the Book of Mormon. And I wish I could get into that, but I'm trying to wrap this up.
You and John Lundwall, yeah, you really do need to talk.
One of these days, he's going to watch this and be like, oh, we're such kindred spirits. So we're going to look at evidence from the Tollens Valley in Germany. This is what we should find. And this is kind of how I'm going to wrap this up. Tollens Valley is 1300 BCE. Okay. 4,000 warriors got together to fight a battle. And since 1996, they have unearthed more than 300 metal finds. So these are some of those arrows here. And you can see the differences in the arrows that they found at the battle site. You have metal ones, and you also have stone ones. Okay. 12,500 bones belonging to about 150 individuals. Recovery included swords, wooden clubs, arrowheads, and some of the arrowheads were found still embedded in the skulls of the people that they shot. That's this picture here. This is a human skull, and that's the arrowhead that hit the brain.
Wondered what that was. Okay.
Yep. And wow. This is some of the metal that they found there. So you can see the copper wristbands and items that were made, knives and stuff. So this is what they're pulling out of Germany. Now, why is this such a good example? This is a good example because the evidence found at Tollens is so good and is so plentiful for 4,000 people that they are now able to make entire scientific studies out of it where they can track where these populations came from. So this study discusses that based upon the arrowheads and what they found in the soil, they were able to figure out that there were tribes coming from southern Germany to fight in northern Germany. So this was a population that expanded the state. Now, Cumorah is more recent by a millennium. And the Jaredite battle is 500 times larger than Tollens. The Nephite battle is 57 times larger than Tollens. And we have more evidence from Germany of 4,000 warriors a millennium before the Nephite narrative than we have for anything that should have been 50 times. We should be 57 to 500 times more likely to find this stuff. And it's not there. And how would we find it? We would find it by urban development, cutting the roads. All this stuff ties together.
Yeah, Dr. John Lundwell points out that, Roman artifacts, which are everywhere, only about 5% has been found. But that is how much there is, right? And there's nothing here.
Another why Talents is a good example. Let's talk about the bones. If we were turning bones up out of the soil, we would be able to look at the bones and figure out how these people died. So this is a study from Talents, and they can show us where the type of stab wounds they've got. We've got blunt force, we've got stab, we've got arrow shots. So we know how these people died. We know from the bones, and this is stuff we should find. And it's not. I mean, I don't know how many times I can say it's not there. I'm going to skip past a couple of these slides so we can wrap this up on time. Basically, in the National Register, if you go through and look at the National Register of Historic Places, there's lots of different categories in the state of New York for Native American culture and history. So this is just a few. It's Native American military. So if it was a military conflict, if it was a battleground, they thought it would be categorized under the National Register of Historic Sites as that. Okay. When we look at Wayne County and we look at what the sites are in that area, the historic sites that are on the National Register, not a single one of them comes up as Native American, prehistoric, or Paleo-Indian. Everything in that county is European expansion, population, maritime history, performing arts. Okay, so it's structures, it's buildings, it's old churches. It's not Paleo-Indian. It's not Native American sites. Now, with limited exception, you look at Ontario County just to the south, the same holds true. There's a couple sites in there, but these are from the 1500s and 1600s. And they're known Iroquois Confederacy. They're known Seneca. And then in 2000, the Federal Register published an inventory of Native American human remains and associated objects that were transferred from one museum to another, in this case, going to the Science Center in Rochester. The inventory listed objects pulled from the soil in Ontario during the 20th century, and they were all common items. They were all Seneca in nature. There was nothing in there that stood out as different, that was ever flagged as Book of Mormon or lost peoples or even mysterious. We know who these people were. We know what was coming out of the ground. Finally, BYU kills literalism, but it actually doesn't. They published this article saying New York is not the site. We'll have to look elsewhere. So instead of just saying, look, we know it's not here, they leave it open. It's hey, this is not it, but hey, we'll find it eventually, maybe if you look at it. So not going to talk too much about this, but in 2004, BYU said that Cumorah is a clean hill. In the same article where they say it's a clean hill, they say that they're not aware of any archaeological digs on the site. It's so weird. All right, so I'm going to wrap this up. Of course, there's no evidence, but just trust us. So Hill Cumorah literalism is rooted in the mound builder myth, which was advocated by New York political figures and publications during Joseph's lifetime. Publications by Governor DeWitt specifically mentioned Ontario County and Canandaigua as part of that myth. These ideas were perpetuated in local and regional papers for decades. These ideas fueled treasure hunting throughout the region. Contemporary ideas, hold on a second. The contemporary to these ideas and their community, Lucy Smith gives comments on Joseph's affinity for speculating on Native American origins and practices. He claims to have revelation were the ideas of indigenous populations, but these echo the popular sentiments at the time. And Joseph then mixes the mound builder myth with contemporary ideas that Native Americans were Jews and presents these two ideas in the Book of Mormon as fact. These ideas become the Orthodox presentation as fact, which fuels the literalism that drives groups like the Firm Foundation. The pronouncements of prophets, seers, and revelators over 100 years that we covered, those fuel that literalism, because every single time someone wants to question, is this true? Did this happen? The apologist will point back to the prophets and say, well, you have your science. I follow the prophet. The prophet trumps anything that can possibly be questioned. Mormon apologists then push false narratives based on 19th century scientific racism as revealed truth. The kind of archaeological evidence that we should expect to find is commonly turned up via urban and rural development. And a century of development in agriculture, urban development in the region has not produced any evidence for claims of the Book of Mormon or leaders of the church. Book of Mormon literalism, once seen as the mysteries of God that have yet to be revealed, is a conspiracy theory on par with flat earth or chemtrails, as far as I'm concerned. And it's leaving the point where the church is now running away from literalism. They're trying to get away from it as fast as they can. Wilcox recently called the Joseph Smith translation an inspired commentary, right? We're getting away from that literalism. It's no longer a translation. Nelson has downplayed the historicity of the Book of Mormon, saying it's a spiritual book with some history in it. It's not a historical textbook. They started this process long ago with getting away from the speculative theology and controlling everything with correlation. And that just carries on to what they're doing now. And despite all of this, right, the literalists, the people who push this, the Book of Mormon Firm Foundation folks, they present themselves as the faithful historians. And they are opposed to liberal revisionists and that devious Leonard Arrington. But the whole concept, the idea that this battle happened, that New York has decided this mass graves, is not true. It is central to the Book of Mormon narrative. It's central to what we were raised on. We were taught this. We sang Book of Mormon stories as kids. And the church has no vested interest in quieting or stopping the literalists from perpetuating this. Because if the church takes any stand outside of, hey, we're not going to take a stand. If they were to come out and say, hey, Rod Meldrum, stop using Native American death to try to promote the Book of Mormon, it undercuts their authority. And nobody in church leadership is going to actively oppose a message which makes people look to them as the authorities. In an institution where you're standing with your community is bowing your head and saying yes, no one's going to rock that boat. But these are lies, and people believe them. And these literalists are perpetuating a narrative, and they're telling their kids, and they're teaching this at some of these church-owned schools in Utah, and they are carrying on a practice which started in the 1700s, 1600s of downgrading Native American history and superimposing a white European Christian narrative on top of everything else. Mormonism is involved in this now. It's been involved in it since 1830. And it drives me nuts. And so that's the summary for all this. Sorry if it was a bit circuitous.
Not at all. No, but, you took us right through it. No, it was absolutely perfect. And I have to say, embarrassing that this is still the narrative that's being put forward in the 21st century. And I spend a lot of time on Faithful social media. So they do wrestle with these questions. A lot of them have arrived at it's not literal. You don't have to believe it literally or in any of these battles, but that completely falls apart. We've done several episodes on that, and we don't even need to go into the reasons. But another thing I'm seeing more and more is all of this evidence and artifacts were taken up into heaven so that our faith is what we have, and that's the perfect answer. There's no rebuttal to that. If you literally believe that all of this has been scrubbed, basically a cleaner, right? A celestial cleaner came down and took it away so that you would have to rely on your feelings and faith alone. You can't argue with those people.
Yeah, and my response to that is simple. Who wants to deal with a God that's going to play games with you like that?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
I mean, seriously, like one of the things that killed me, I finally had to go to my bishop and say, look, I can't do this, is I got to a point where I could not teach a lesson and tell people, you should believe this. This is true. When I didn't believe it was true when I knew that there was no basis for it, right? And so who wants a God that says, hey, this is the answer. This is the miraculous miracle, as Nelson put it. But I'm not going to give you anything to back it up. I'll give you evidence for the Bible. I'll give you evidence for the for the kingdom of Judah. I'll give you evidence that Paul existed. I'll even give you a couple references here and there to the physical existence of Christ. But I'm not going to give you a shred of evidence for anything else. And I'm going to make you look stupid because every single time you say something about it, I'm going to undercut you with fact. You know, God tells Joseph Smith, these are the ancestors of the Native Americans. Generation later, God's like, got you with that one. No, they're actually not. And, you know, science, which God also does science. So God gives you the narrative of the Book of Mormon. He gives you these ideas, gives you this context, tells you to teach them, while he's also the greatest scientist in all of existence. And he provides the tools that somebody else has used to undercut the narrative he gave you. Who wants to believe that?
And then you burn in hell forever if he tricks you. If he's smart enough to outsmart you, you burn in hell. And he's the most omnipotent creature in the universe, but because he could outsmart you, you get to burn in hell.
Sounds a lot like Loki to me.
I was going to say trickster God, but it makes me think of you, Landon, in your story when you were a little kid. Every Mormon butts up against actual history, actual evidence, actual everything that was really there. Like when you realized, Landon, when you checked out that book from the library when you were very young, it just doesn't add up. Do you want to tell that really quick?
No, it was a book about them crossing the land bridge, and you know, then I read it and thought, well, wow, this is really cool. And then I was, you know, quickly tutored that no, that's not how they came. They came on boats from
by your mom,
from the Nephites,
yeah. But every Mormon kid is going to buck up against that, you know, that it doesn't fit. We know something different, something special, and we're right. Doesn't match everything else, what's really there, but we know.
Well, we are programmed from the time we're very little to always give the benefit of the doubt and deference to the church message. You know, if you hear something that's contrary, your programming is you are faithful, you are following the prophet by giving deference to whatever you're told first. Critical thinking is not something they want you to be critical thinking when you're coming up with allegories and when you're, you know, talking about the message of the Book of Mormon. But the second you turn that in any direction that they can't control, you really should be looking at trusted and approved sources. So, guys, thank you so much for having me. This has been a lot of fun. I'm hoping we'll be able to do another one here soon.
Oh, absolutely. But no, I mean, it's just so interesting to try to predict where this will go, because like I said, I do look at social media from the faithful side a lot, and it does seem to be two camps. Not literal, don't even worry about that. It doesn't have to be literal. And the other one, it is literal. And I believe all these evidences, firm foundation and Book of Mormon evidence, you know, it's interesting to see how those camps, you know, collide, or did they not even care about each other? Because you find your own way to believe, find your own way to make it work for you, no matter what it is. So, Landon, do you have any final thoughts? I talked a lot.
I just want to thank Jim for convincing me that the Book of Mormon took place in Mesoamerica. So,
next episode. That's right. And that's true. All our Meso fans out there are going, we told you. We told you.
I rabbit hole stuff. If I get the idea that I want to start looking into that, that's all I'm going to do for the next 6 months. And I don't want to spend that much time.
No. And others have done it, and that's okay. But again, the same thing happens in Mesoamerica. They take what's there, which there's a lot more of it, and they appropriate it. And I'll give you the example again of a book at a LDS bookstore that we came across, and a lady working there said, "Oh, have you seen this? This is Mesoamerica architecture, and this is Christ. You know, it has this big picture of a guy on it.
You look like a crab."
Well, we didn't know that yet. We were like, "Oh," she goes, "Yes, this is totally Jesus. It proves that he came to Mesoamerica, and here it is." And we're like, "Okay, we got to buy this book for Dr. John Lundwall, because he'll be able to cut through it right away." But she told us, bore testimony, that this book was a book about Jesus in Mesoamerica. Here's the relief sculpture. Here he is. So John gets it, and he looks at it, and he goes, "Oh," and he starts laughing really hard. You can probably hear how he laughs. And he goes, "Oh no, this is a headhunter. Don't you see the skulls hanging around his neck and around his waist? Don't you see the giant crab claws on his head? Don't you see, you know, it was not Jesus unless Jesus was a headhunter with a giant crab claw on his head." But again, it works for their narrative. It looks like it's a figure. It must be Jesus, right? They do the same thing.
It's a deity. It must be Jesus, because that's what they must have believed, because that's what the Book of Mormon says. So
it must be real.
What I love about what you did here, Jim, is, you're not an archaeologist. You're not you're a transportation guy. And yet you can take your discipline and you can say, in my discipline, I can look at the Book of Mormon and I can compare and I can say, this is what my discipline says the Book of Mormon should have. Yep. And that was one of the things when I started to deconstruct, is I said, I want to look at archaeology, linguistics. You start breaking geography, geology, and it failed in every case. And now here is transportation, and it fails in the transportation one as well. So just because you're not an expert in archaeology, you can take the field that you're in a lot of cases and use that to say what in the Book of Mormon that should happen based on my knowledge as a professional, and I can guarantee you it's going to fail. You can try to make a way and say, oh, he talked about a tooth infection. I'm a dentist, and that proves, but in reality, you can look at, if you take it and look at it from just an open view, you're going to say, this is what I should find if this is true, and I'm not finding it. And all different disciplines come together and say, this did not happen.
Yeah.
Right. And in your case, Unoriginal Jim, you are brave enough to come and bring your study and your research forward, because Landon and I also like this idea of showing what was really there, and then you compare it to what the Book of Mormon says is there, and it doesn't match up. So we have approached people of other, niche disciplines, in Mesoamerica or others that would know what was there and could speak to it, not even in a Mormon context, but just to show what's there. And then we run into people that are not LDS, but they are hesitant and reluctant to share their scholarship and their expertise. And they have flat out said, I don't want to rock any boats with Mormonism. I don't want to talk about what's really there or what it really is, because I don't want to be seen as a religious bigot. Simply by saying what your field, you are an expert, PhD level. We've talked to people and they're like, I'm not comfortable talking about that, because I always compare it to, I tell this story, like you're at a party and the hostess says, oh, Jim is about to arrive, not you. And he believes in Santa Claus still. Nobody say anything against Santa Claus, right? We can't. He's going to talk about it a lot. And you just have to because we don't want to hurt him. We don't want to send him into some kind of a crisis. We have come across this with professionals, university level, who do not want to speak to some of these topics just because they don't want to rock any boat or come across as a religious bigot.
It has everything to do with the church's money.
Yes.
It has everything to do with the church's money.
Yeah.
The simple fact is that, the claims are falsifiable, right? If the claims are falsifiable, then it is on the institution that makes the claims to justify them. And what the church does is they make the claims in the text. They'll even let former leaders make the claims, but they don't ever take responsibility for them. They don't take responsibility for the impact of their claims. They don't take responsibility for the impact of some of the stuff that's happened with minority populations. And so what they do is it's like, it's so dishonest. It's so frustratingly dishonest. They throw money around and they threaten people. And you come to church and the people in church are told, hey, you really don't know the real issue that's going on here. We didn't actually threaten them. No, that wasn't really an attorney. He's a stake president. He's also an attorney, but he's actually a stake president, right? And so the claims are falsifiable. They deserve to be called out. They deserve to, and if anybody, if this is so frustrating to me. If somebody was making false claims about the church would go out and publicly do it. If under the banner of heaven, they came with a press release saying you're wrong about this.
Yeah.
What was it? The last one that Lindsay Henson Park did, a Western one. What was that?
American Primeval.
Yeah.
Even Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, press statements saying this is not us. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
And so they will attack other people's claims. Mm-hmm. But if you question them, like you're going to be in trouble. And Well, that's a whole other episode I could go off about. We're running late.
Take notes. That's right. Yeah, there's so much to talk about. So
it's 11:30
here. This has been fantastic. And I know we had to, there was so much content. And so I would suggest if anybody wants to, stop the slides and read through them, because we paraphrased a lot of them, and Unoriginal Jim put so much work into this, and it's just incredible. And it's a look at it from a point of view I never even thought of. But as soon as you brought it up, I'm like, why did I never think of that? It's brilliant. It really is. So we just appreciate you so much.
The transportation stuff doesn't make sense unless you understand how the narrative got there. So we had to go through all of that.
And that's it. And you did have it. You took us down the whole thing. And so, no, it's been incredible. And we really look forward to doing future episodes with you, because you're wonderful. You're not unoriginal, even though that's your name. And everybody, please go over to TikTok and find Unoriginal Jim, because he's got some other really great stuff. I mean, he is a fresh new voice here in post-Mormonism, and it's awesome. So please comment and let us know what you thought about this presentation, about everything. There was so much in here to unpack. You might even have to watch it twice. I know I will. So please like and subscribe to Mormonish Podcast. And if you want to be made aware of when their new episodes hit, you can hit the notification bell. If you would like to help financially support our podcast, we have links in the show notes. We're a non-profit, and we have links to donor box, and we just appreciate every single one of you that do make a donation. It really, honestly, and I'm not exaggerating, lets us continue to do this and have unoriginal guests like Unoriginal Jim and this fantastic content. So thank you, Landon, again for being my co-host. And you guys kind of matched. I don't know how I didn't get the note. So, and I will say, I don't know if you noticed me kind of looking to the side on the Mormon newscast, there was a spider that was going like this. Well, the spider is right there. Here it is a day later that we're taping. So I don't know what's going to happen by the time it airs. Who knows? I may be in the hospital with a spider bite. Hopefully not. But thank you again, Original Jim. And we will see everybody next time on Mormonish Podcast. Thank you all.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of Mormonish. We really appreciate our listeners and would love to hear from you if you have a story you'd like to share. You can email us at mormonishpodcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and on our website, mormonishpodcast.org. And don't forget to look for us on YouTube and like and subscribe. Keep joyful, everybody.